Hey there, welcome to another video on chess and problem and puzzle solving. And today's puzzle is a very interesting one. This is the position white to move and checkmate black in two moves. So you can pause the video here, take a moment to think through the solution and see if you can actually find it. All right, welcome back. Now, before we get into the solution, which should be pretty straightforward, I can just show it to you and two moves, the video is over, the puzzle is over and everything. But what I'm always interested in is not about just the solution, but how does one arrive at the solution? Now, first thing you should know is not all checkmate and two are made the same. There's a lot of difference in terms of how these puzzles are crafted. For instance, let's take a traditional puzzle. So this was a randomly clicked puzzle that I saw in Checkmate in 2, and as you can see, the rating here is about 2060. So it's actually a pretty tough Checkmate in 1 puzzle by all regular standards. But if you still have a certain intuition and algorithmic thinking about it, the answer is not very far away. For example, if you apply the algorithm that I have built in Zugzwang, which is check, kill, attack, defense, CKAD, almost most puzzles, 95% of the puzzles can be solved by just thinking in this order, saying, can I give a check? Can I capture something? Can I kill something? Can I escape? Can I attack or can I defend? And most puzzles would fall under the gamut of, one of these 4 options. So applying the same thing, you can think of 2 possible checks here. One is this and the other is this. And you got to evaluate both of them. So if I give a check here, king moves here. And after that, the only possible check would be either the rook or this one or the bishop here. But it doesn't matter where it is, the king would just escape out. And only in the case of a bishop, he'll just move back. So since he has an escape hatch, this is not going to be my answer. So I can reject the very first premise that the rook has to come to f4 to give a check. So got to evaluate the other one. So what happens in this case? There's an interesting one because when I give this check, it's almost a forcing response. So now you can see the intuition that I'm talking about. So CKAD is like an idea generator. But Zugzwang, the concept of Zugzwang, which is forcing the hand of your opponent, is what really makes the difference. So in this case, when the rook captures it, white has no option but to capture this back. And that itself is an indication that it's probably a correct move. But that's not enough. You've got to visualize it now and say okay, if rook takes pawn is forced to take it back. And then what is the check that I have? And the only 2 possible checks are these. And you realize that this is checkmate. And this is what we call as the Morphy's mate. That's the pattern. The bishop supports the rook and the king doesn't have an escape hatch anywhere. And as you can see, the algorithm was think of the idea generator, the option generator, which is CKAD. Use that along with the concept of Zugzwang, which is forced moves. And more or less, you can solve many of them. But unfortunately, that's not going to be applicable here because the forcing moves here are very few. The queen captures this or this, the rook captures this or this. And even that, for example, if I say queen captures rook, it's forcing. He has to capture. And technically, it's not forcing because he could capture the queen or the rook. So that's not forcing in its true form. Queen taking this is definitely forcing, which is rook takes it back, and then I take it back and I don't have a checkmate inside at all. Is this forcing? Yes, absolutely, because he can't take it with the pawn. It's a pin, so king has to take it. And therefore, you realize that, whatever the forcing moves are, which is one for the queen and one for the rook, are not going to lead you to a checkmate. And now, even if you think of CKAD and think of rook checks, or queen checks, 4 possible options, none of them lead you to a checkmate in 2 moves. And therefore, this is not going to work. However, the interesting part about this is the fact that while you did it, you saw a lot of patterns, you saw a lot of possibilities. And then you realize the reason why each and every piece is there. For example, what's the reason for this pawn? This pawn is here because if it were black's turn, he would be able to give you a check. And therefore, a checkmate in 2 would not be possible if your first move is an initiative losing move. What do I mean by initiative losing move? So an initiative in chess is where you control the narrative. So for example, if rook were to capture this pawn, then you are controlling the initiative here because he's supposed to respond to that. He could respond with rook takes rook, or he could move the king up or down. but you are forcing him to do that. He can't, for example, decide to move this pawn here. But if you were to make a move like, okay, let me move the queen here. Now that would mean white has lost the initiative. So king can capture this, king can move this, rook can move here, and it's like the opportunity to decide what the narrative is going to be is in black's hand right now. Now, if this pawn were not here, then black could take the initiative or make the best use of the initiative that has been given to start giving checks. So that's the reason you have this particular pawn. So it's very, very important to realize how this puzzle is designed. You should also realize that this would be a checkmate, excepting for the fact that the rook is supporting it. So the rook is kind of stuck there. At the same time, you also realize that this promotion is waiting to happen. And if it happens, then you don't have a two-move checkmate. So, for instance, one of the exercises that you can do, just like you did CK80 and forcing moves, which gave you a lot of patterns, is to also think, what if this piece didn't exist? And then the answer is actually quite simple. I could move this and maybe think of a checkmate here. But that won't work because the rook would move away and I won't have a checkmate. All right, so in that case, can I move the rook back and threaten to checkmate this way? Then it doesn't matter which way the rook moves, because, okay, if I move this and the rook moves out, then I have a checkmate. And if he doesn't move out, then even if the king moves here, I have a checkmate. The only problem right now is if I move this rook and he promotes it into a queen, I don't have a checkmate anymore. That's the issue here. So that's the reason I have this pawn, which prevents me from doing this particular thing. Now, as you can see, oftentimes you will have many, many possibilities, and a good puzzle is something which prevents or pares down all those possibilities to arrive at the only possible answer here. Okay, so now if it were black's turn, he would promote this, he could move this, he could move the king, he could move the pawn. So he has a lot of opportunity to do something. Now you don't have forcing moves, which means this is going to be an initiative losing move. So you got to make a move, something like this, and hope to find a checkmate no matter what. So this is a checkmate in two with multiple possible endings. And the answer is actually quite beautiful. The answer is sacrificing the rook here. Now let's think about all the possibilities that black has here. So let's go one by one. Let's start with the king. So the king can move back or here. Both of those are possible. And if he moves back to a8, this is checkmate. And if he were to move to a6, this is checkmate. So you've taken care of the king, no matter what. The two possibilities for the king, both are going to end in checkmate. This pawn is pinned, so he can't move anywhere. But the rook can move. And it doesn't matter where he moves. It could be any one of these 7 possible moves that he can move to. And wherever he moves, queen takes pawn is checkmate. So you've taken care of 7 possible rook moves. What if this pawn moves? Then you have the checkmate here, which is like a rook roller mate. And you say, okay, fine. In that case, let me promote into a queen. In that case, rook takes the queen and you have a checkmate, which is a back rank mate. You could also say, all right, if I take the rook and make it into a queen, then I have another checkmate with the queen. So as you can see, the beauty of this particular puzzle is the fact that white decides to lose the initiative, gives the initiative to black. Black then has umpteen number of possible moves, but it doesn't matter what he moves, every single possibility leads to a checkmate. And that, my friends, is a very, very beautiful chess puzzle. I hope you enjoyed this puzzle, and if you'd like to see more of this, please do like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you so much.